class. Last time we met, we talked about slope. And we learned that slope is a measure of the steepness of a line, how steep a line is, or its rate of change, how far up or down it's going compared to how far left or right it's going. Now let's take a look at a slightly different problem. We're still going to be dealing with the relationship between x and y and slope, but instead of starting with a graph, we're starting with an equation. So an important thing to remember is that the representations, you can go back and forth between them. And typically we've been doing a graph and then a table and then an equation. This time though, we're going to be starting with the equation. Okay, so since we're starting here, we're going to work our way backwards. You can always go from an equation to a table, and then a table to a graph, or a graph to a table, and a table to an equation. However, you always have to make a table in between the two. All right? So when we start with our equation, the first thing that we need to do is figure out what's the slope, because that's the information that an equation gives us. All right, and looking here, this tells us that this is saying that x times 4 is equal to y. So that's like the relationship. It's saying that they're related by being multiplied by 4. This number in front of the x is always our slope. So now that we understand the relationship and we've identified our slope, it's time for us to build a table. Whoop! Next step in our bridge. Okay, make a table. We can make a t-chart. Okay, and our x and y are always going to go on either side. So we have our y on this side and our x on this side. Okay, and you're like, but I don't have any numbers to work with. And that's right. But the good news is that it doesn't matter what number we have. You can think of x as whatever number we put in, and then we apply this relationship of times 4, and we'll get out our y. So let's try putting in an easy value. It's better to stick with easy numbers because they're easier to graph and easier to work with. So when I put in a 0, if I do times 4, if I multiply that by our slope, times 4, I'm going to get out 0. So our first point would be 0, 0. Okay. Now let's try putting in another number. And it doesn't matter what number I put in. Let's pick 1 because it's an easy one. 1, and I multiply it times our slope, times 4. If we put in a 1, we get out a times 4, 4. Easy per cheesy. Now, as long as you have 2 points, you're ready to graph, but it's better to have more than 1 point. Excuse me. Whew. So, let's try a slightly different number. Let's do a negative. Doesn't matter what we choose. We start with -3. We apply a relationship. X times 4, or input of 3 times 4, will get out a -12. Now I've got 3 different points I can graph and create a line. If you look at a table and you're ever not sure what the slope is, remember you can identify the relationship, the proportional relationship, or sometimes it's even called the constant of proportionality, by dividing y by x. And it works with any 2 points that are not 0. So let's choose -12, y is -12, and 3, -3 for x. We'll take that pair. -3, or -12 divided by -3 gives us +4, same as our slope. So just a way of finding the slope from our table. Okay, now we're ready to graph. Each of these is an ordered pair. Okay, so when x is 0, y is 0. That's just 0.00, right? So 0, 0 is our origin. All proportional relationships go through 0, 0. If you see it going through 0, 0, you know it's a proportional relationship. Next point we have, x is 1, y is 4. So remember, x is always left or right, so we start by going to 1 and then up to 4. And then our last point was a little odd, but it's going to go off our graph. So I'm going to graph a slightly different point. I'm going to do -2, -8, which would also be on our graph. -2 times 4. All right, so now that I have my points, I can connect them together to make a line. And you notice that they form a straight line. Now these weren't the only points that would be possible on the line. They're just the ones that we chose to graph. So now that we have gone from our table, we can go to our graph. And that's how we show the relationship between each of them. At this point, if you wanted to, you could find the relationship between the 2 points by looking at the rise over the run, making a slope triangle. You get 4 over 1, or yep, you guessed it, a slope is equal to 4. So, you'll notice that in each of our representations, we have a slope of 4. We have x and y values being shown in some way. Now let's look at a really challenging one. It's not that bad, but you probably are a little bit intimidated by that fraction. But it works the exact same way. Because we're given an equation, we started our equation. And remember, it's always, we can go back and forth between the graph and the table and the equation. So if I have an equation, if that's where I'm starting, we're starting at equation. Our next step has to be to make a table in between, okay? So let's identify our slope. Looks like our slope here is 2/3. It's always the number in front of x. So m is equal to 2/3. Fractions. I know you don't like them. So we have x times 2/3 is y. That's how they're related. Whatever our x is, we multiply it by 2/3 to get y. So we started our equation and we're done with that. So now we're going to follow this along, and our next step is going to be to make a table. Okay, we draw our t. So we have an x and a y on either side. Okay, our y and our x. Okay, and we know that the relationship is going to be to multiply by 2/3. So to go from x to y, it's times 2/3. So a good first step, a good first number we said was always 0. Anything times 0, 0 times 2/3 is still going to be 0. It's a proportional relationship, so it goes through the point 0, 0. Now that we've done that, we need to pick another number and some values. So remember that you can put in a fraction to multiply. So let's try 1. What if we put in 1? 1 times 2/3. Imagine that if we did that, 1 times 2/3. And you'll notice it gives me a fraction. Uh-oh, I get a decimal. 1 times 2/3 is going to be 2/3. Ugh, I don't want to have to graph that. So let's try another number. Let's try 2. 2 times 2/3 is 4/3. And you'll notice I can change back and forth between a decimal and a fraction. Still no bueno. So let's try 3. Finally, I have got myself a value. So what I have done here is I have put in a 3. And when I did that, what did we get out? That's right, we got a 2. Because we're multiplying by a fraction, it makes it smaller. So put in a 3, get out a 2. So you might have noticed when we were doing this that until we hit the number 3, we didn't get a whole number. That's because when you're multiplying by a fraction, it's the same as dividing by the bottom number. So I want to pick numbers that I can divide easily by 3. 4, for example, is just going to give me another fraction. However, if I go skip count to 6, 3, 6, or 9, I'm going to get a whole number. So 6, put in 6, get out 4. 6, 4. Or if I skip count it again, 3, 6, 9. 9 times 2/3 is 6. So when I put in a 9, I get out a 6. This gives me plenty of points. Okay? And remember, if you ever wanted to find the rise over the run, you just needed to pick one of these sets of points and divide, okay, your rise, your y, divided by your run. Rise over run. All right, so in this case, I'm going to pick 6 and 9. Y is 6. When y is 6, x is 9. They're a pair. And you'll notice that when I simplify this, divide both of them by 3, I end up with 2/3. Same as my slope. Always find the proportional constant, or the slope, by dividing y by x. Now that I have my points, I can graph them to make my line. 0, 0, over 3, up 2, put a point, over 6, up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, over 9, up 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sweet. Right? So now I can connect my points and make a line by putting arrows at the end. You'll also notice that when I draw my slope triangle, just between any 2 points, I get a rise of 2 and a run of 3, or my slope. So this is how you go. Once you have your table, you go to your graph. So this is how you identify the slope in an equation, make a table using that relationship, and then use the points in your table to make a graph. Thank you.